Hey there, YouTube. This is more of a supplementation to my Magic the Gathering videos. This is more of a... It's not a deck tech, it's a personal account of when I played Magic the Gathering. And setting the scene, it was about mid-1994. I was about to turn 13 years old. Alright. Now, I had acquired a few packs of Magic the Gathering. I think like some of the packs from Chronicles. A couple of packs from the Dark. I think the best card I pulled was a Safe Haven or Sorrow's Path or something. Nothing really good from the Dark. Chronicles, I think I pulled... what the fuck was it? A Nebuchadnezzar. I pulled a Nebuchadnezzar off of Chronicles. And that was pretty much the good cards that I had back then. I was a noob, didn't know anything. Fallen Empires came out, and I remember, I believe, I went ahead and it was $1 a pack for like 8 cards. Now, for those who are sitting there thinking, well, that's pretty freaking ridiculous, remember that this was during the craze of the trading card games of like Magic the Gathering and stuff. Like, you would actually see commercials for Magic the Gathering on TV back then. You'd actually see the commercial. Like, if you remember the commercial where the kid was like, you know, it was like some like 1/1 goblin. He was like, 1/1 goblin, that's stupid as hell. And there's a little knock on the door, and there's a goblin in his front door. And he's got the card, Giant Growth, and the kid's like, Giant Growth? And then the goblin becomes huge and just picks the kid up and like throws him onto the fucking coffee table and shit. Like, that was the time frame when Magic the Gathering actually had a fucking TV commercial. It actually had a TV commercial of like, I don't even remember what the fuck the goblin was, like Raging Goblin. I don't even think it was that. I think it was just something ridiculously stupid. But it was just so fucking hilarious. So I remember buying a couple packs of dump trucks. I remember buying a couple of packs of Fallen Empires, and you know, eventually building a few decks that were massively, massively subpar. Always losing to like random crap like White Weenie. Or just anything, just random in general. I was a guy that was I was a guy that was like the tribal guy when I first started, like a lot of us were. So I had like that Merfolk deck with, you know, like no Lords of Atlantis and just like random just shit for creatures. And just really wasn't that good. You know, I'd always end up going against a guy that was like first turn playing Savannah Lion Go, next turn Crusade, swing for 3, and then it was like, oh crap. And you know, like Zernorb land tax, like the second balance was cast and resolved, you were gonna lose the game. They'd cast that balance a second time because you could play 2 copies. You could play 4 copies of balance back then in Standard. Casting balance that second time was just plain mean. I mean, like, horrifically mean. And it was just ridiculous. Disgusting mean to play, oh hey, 2 copies of balance against your opponent. 1 was enough normally. So obviously I continued my relative level of sucking at the game because I had no concept of what to do. I had no concept of how to play. I mean, I knew the basic fundamentals. You untap, your upkeep, you draw, main phase, combat phase. Like, I knew stuff like that, but building a good deck, how to abuse the interaction between this card and this card and this card to make a deck even more powerful, let alone just getting a hand on, or getting copies of those cards, were pretty damn impossible. My dog is rooting around in the corner there, finding a spot to lay in. So, Ice Age came out, and it was a new set, and it was like, oh, it's gonna be, it's set in an area of Dominiara where there are, or Dominiara. I always pronounce it differently every once in a while. It's set in this Ice Age setting after the Brothers' War, and it was, alright, so we're flipping through cards, Keldor and Dead, Morfiend. I'm flipping from Alliances to Ice Age in certain situations here, so, forgive me. Just, random interesting stuff, like Ashen Ghoul, and I always loved the artwork back then. It was, like, the artwork was just so amazing back then. I loved it. Power Sync, the artwork for Power Sync in Ice Age was, like, kind of trippy, I thought. When I first saw it, man, it was just like this gigantic fucking eye, and just like just swirls around. It was so creepy. And I remember this one card that just stuck out, and I just really liked the way it looked. Everybody fucking looked at me and said, dude, you're stupid collecting that card. It's worthless. I think there was like Scry or Inquest literally said 0 fucking stars. This is the dumbest card in the set. And it was a picture of a skull with a hand up, like a fucking cop, like an undead cop, like, no, thou shalt not pass, fuck you. And it was called Necropotence. And nobody really thought anything of that card, so I was like trading. I was getting hosed on trades back then, I really was. I wasn't a really savvy trader. Like, I'd trade Underground River or Adakar Waste, or a Brushland or a Sulphurous Springs for a copy of Necro, which was a horrible, horrible trade. I was getting hosed on it. Let me drink a little bit of my magic wake-up juice in the morning. I love my coffee like I love my women. Bitter and murky. So anyways, I had like a trade binder with like 20-something fucking copies of Necropotence. It was just like ridiculous. People would look at it and go, yeah, you're just a complete fucking noob. You have no concept of card value. Let's see what good shit you got so I can rape you on a trade. All that changed when somebody really figured out how to abuse Necropotence. Like, all that changed because Necro went from shit to fucking solid gold, and it was like, and everybody was like, wait a second, wasn't there that dumbass kid that had like a whole fucking trade binder, like 3 pages full of fucking Necros? Like, oh my god, yeah, let's talk to that kid, because they trade all their Necros for the really good cards that I had. Well, the good cards being like Painlands, basically. And it was relatively simple because at the time, not many of us knew a lot. You look at Necropotence right now. 3 black enchantment. Skip your draw phase. Okay. Whenever you would discard a card, remove that card from the game. Pay 1 life. Put the top card of your library aside. At the beginning of your discard phase, your end step, put that card in your hand. So, basically, you have to pay 1 life for a card. It's like a souped-up version of Greed, which was 1 black. First of all, Greed I think Greed let you still draw cards during your draw phase. but it was 1 black, pay 1 life, draw a card. And greed wasn't massively broken. You know, it was like, it was, you don't have to pay mana for greed, but you still skip your draw step, so it's like, what the fuck is the point? So, when somebody figured out how to break this card beyond belief, that's when the Black Summer started. And before anybody could get there and trade for my Necros, I had a... No, don't play with the balloon, kitty, because you're going to pop it, and all the headphone users are going to be resting in peace when they hear that. So, come here, Fuzzy. Come here, Fuzzy. Say hi to all the people online. You just sit here. You sit here, Mr. Bigglesworth. And I forget whether it was a copy of Inquest or Scry, but they would have like deck spotlights, you know, like, oh, this Pro Tour here, or this tournament here, or this here, and this deck just ripped everybody to shreds. And it was a mono black Necro, I believe it was. And when I noticed that they were like, this card is brutal. And I remember when Affinity came out, and everybody was complaining about how broken the Affinity mechanic was. It's like, that kills too quickly, you can't do anything about it. And I'm sitting there remembering when you would play against Necro, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and play my Swamp, and I'm gonna go ahead and go Dark Rit, and then I'm gonna go ahead and play fucking Necro, and I'm gonna pay 3 life, and I'm just gonna fill my hand back up. That was broken. Affinity was broken for the environment that it was in. The standard environment that it was in at the time was broken, but it wasn't Necro broken. It was not broken like that. So, back in the day, the way the rules went, there was that coin toss, basically, okay, who goes first, boom. And you would go first and draw. There was no such thing as on the play or on the draw back then. It was, no, turn 1, you would still draw. So, you would have 8 cards in your opening hand to start the game. You know, Swamp, Dark Rit, Hippie, go. You know, Hypnotic Spectre, boom. So that would, you got to discard a card at random. And it was like, okay, you better have like a Swords, the Plowshares, or Lightning Bolt to take care of it. Because you could possibly have that land knocked from your hand. And then, of course, obviously, discard being random is horrible. Next turn it could be... Hi, how you doing? Next turn it could be, after the attack phase, Himmatorok. And then you would discard 2 cards at random. Or it could be, you know, another, you know, Dark Rit Hippie. And it was pretty brutal. And then, of course, you had, you know, Knight of Stromgold, Order of the Ebon Hand, that would just, you know, be just brutal. Just, you know, I mean, just, it was just really, really fast weenies. You could pump them, you could give them first strike. All for black. Yeah, how you doing? So it was a really, really brutal time frame. And back then, the mulligan rules were a lot different. You couldn't mulligan if you had a hand of, say, like 2 land and a bunch of, like, 3 or 4 mana cost spells. You could only mulligan if you had all land or no land. So this was the period known as the Black Summer. And it also started the whole internet decking with, you know, message boards. I never had the internet back then, so I wasn't part of it. But I remember a friend of mine, he was like, hey, look, man, give me all your Necros, and I will build a Necro deck for me and you. So I had like 20-something fucking Necros or something back then, I guess. Because I liked the artwork, because I was a fucking noob. So we both played Necro. I never liked it because I thought it was too fucking OP. I was like, I never liked it. It was fun to start winning when all you did was lose, but it wasn't really fun for me. I was like, I just don't like it, man. It's not really fun. And I was like, what other decks are there? And he's like, well, you know, this is the best deck there is. I go, well, what deck beats it? And he's like, you don't want to play the deck that beats it. I'm like, why? Well, it's a boring deck. Well, what's the whole purpose of the deck? He's like, well, the purpose of the deck is basically to force your opponent to not do anything. You control everything. I was like, I control everything? He's like, yeah, you control everything. It's like, I want to see how it plays. Stasis. And I was like, no, I want to play this. And he's like, you're sure? He's like, yeah, I'm sure. Now, this was back before Alliances really came out. So this was like literally before Alliances came out. So when Alliances came out, it got even more powerful because of Force of Will and because of Arcane Denial. In terms of the complexity of playing Stasis back then, it wasn't. It wasn't complex. It was, on a scale of 1 to 10, a 3, maybe a 4. You didn't have to counter everything. All you had to do was get Stasis on the board, a couple of Howling Mines out, because against a Necro player, they don't draw cards anymore. They have to pay life to continue to draw cards. And it was just hilarious because now you're just going to keep drawing cards. Pay your 1 blue for your upkeep. You got your Feldon's Cane, you got your Ivory Tower, you got your, couple Despotic Scepters, your Boomerangs to get rid of Stasis with those, 2 cards. You got your you got your Feldon's, I'm sorry, you got your 1 copy of Land Tax, you got your Zurin Orb, you got your Adhikar Wastes. The black versions would also have Underground Rivers and Limdol's Vaults. Your swords for creature removal, your Kismets to keep everything, to, all the stuff your opponent plays comes into play tapped. Because back then, enchantments didn't tap. We didn't have planeswalkers back then. We didn't have enchantments that could tap. So it was like, whatever. Holy Strength, I don't really give a crap. And we got the deck and we started playing it. And we tested Stasis v Necro Friday night, Saturday night. Friday night or to Saturday would be like Stasis v Necro testing. And then Sunday was all Stasis. Stasis versus Stasis. Stasis mirror match. Whoever got their Feldon's Cane into play won. That was it. That was how. That was like your go-to win for Stasis against Stasis. It didn't matter who played their Howling Mine first. Didn't matter who played their Stasis first. Whoever got that Feldon's Cane into play won the game. Provided there wasn't a Kismet on the opposing side, you won. So you always had your counter magic saved. You always save your damn counter magic. Your Arcane Denials. Always playing Howling Mine, let it go. He's playing Ivory Tower, let it go. Played Land Tax, let it go. Zurin Orb, let it go. Played Stasis, let it go. Kismet, okay, now we're going to a counter battle. It's like Arcane Denial against Arcane Denial against Force of Will against Arcane Denial. Force of Will that, no, Arcane Denial that, Force of Will that. Counter fucking stack was like that high, basically. There were no time limits. You'd be there for an hour playing game 1, round 1. You stood up after I won, and you wanted to punch me in the face. Back then, the judge would look at it and say, okay, this guy has control. He won just... Well, my camera shut off, so I'm going to have to continue this with... I'm going to have to splice these videos together. Where was I? The judge came up, and the judge would watch. If you have control of the game, he would say, okay, go to game 2. Go to game 2. Okay. Pardon me. You would literally wait for the very, very last draw step before you would play that. Like, you would have maybe one card left in your library before you would play that Feldon's Cane, and that's when the whole... Shit. That's when the whole counter war for Feldon's Cane just started. That was like the insanity for Feldon's Cane would start right there. You know, there was no overtime. Well, it was... Well, you know, I mean, there kind of was overtime. If it was in that, like, overtime setting, whoever got control of the game, the judge would basically declare the winner. We didn't have a highest life rule. You know? So it wasn't like this guy has, like, 8 bazillion life from Ivory Tower and fucking Zurin Orb and shit. It was just, this guy's got the Feldon Cane in play, and you're going to deck yourself. He's going to deck you now. So he won. That's when the judge would call it. They were all single elimination back then as well. And I know I said previously, you know, like game 1, round 1. Because that's... I've just all the games I've played recently have always been like, hey, well, best of 3. So we didn't have Swiss back then. And not in my area. Sometimes we'd have tournaments at Crazy Igor's. Now it's Millennium Games in Rochester that were like, you know, Swiss. But it was mostly just in my area where I played. It was single elimination. You lost a game, you lost. You know, that was it. It was... It basically got to a point where it was like, who gave a shit about sideboards for my area? I was like, who gives a fuck about sideboards, man? I'm never going to go to game 2 or 3. So, it got to the point where, in my area, there were, basically 4 decks that you would play. Stasis, Necro, and then 2 Erhnam-Geddon builds. Erhnam-Geddon, which was green-white, focused on Erhnam-Geddon, Bird of Paradise, Armageddon. And Erhnam and Burnham, which is what I like to play. I liked Erhnam and Burnham because it was more my playstyle. You had Sylvan Library, Erhnam-Geddon, Lurgoyf, Tinderwall, Orcish Lumberjack, Bird of Paradise, Findhorn, I think it was Findhorn Elves or Juniper Order Druid. I forget which. No, Findhorn Elves was tap for 1 green. Juniper Order Druid was tap untap target land, I believe. And it wasn't basic land, so you could untap like your Carpulsan Forest or, you know, whatever you had, if you had like City of Brasses in there as well. But the kicker was Jokal Hops. 6 mana red sorcery. Bury all artifacts, creatures, and land. So you would use your birds, your Tinderwalls, your Mana Dork Elves, untap land elves, Mana Dork, Juniper Order Druids, your Orcish Lumberjacks to generate an insane amount of mana and just basically Jokal Hops the board, float, and play Lurgoyf or Erhnam-Geddon. And then hopefully ride that to victory off of, say, like one of your 2 Sylvan libraries that you would have in your deck. And just, okay, just top deck a mountain and utilize lightning bolts or incinerates or a couple of fireballs. Because Fireball was legit tournament strategy back then. Fireball was legit tournament, just 10 to the dome, fuck off. That was a legit strategy to do back then. Nowadays, if you do that and you won, people would say how janky that fucking win was. Oh, you're a fucking miser, dude, with the fireball to the face. But back then, that was legit. Like, fireball. Fireball for 10, bitch. It was like, oh, fuck you. So that's pretty much what it was. So a lot of people started playing Stasis. So you would have Stasis v Stasis, Stasis v Stasis, and it was just like, oh my fucking god, man. It was just so ridiculously crazy. A match would go like an hour long. Like round one would go like over an hour. And you'd have like 7 rounds that day. This is like you're going to sit there and play cards for 7 hours. And if you're playing, and if you're like that new guy, you're fucked, man. I mean, you're coming in and you're fucked because all this shit is just literally too powerful for you to play against. You're dead. So somebody eventually, I forget who, somebody eventually either through magazine or through message board figured out a deck that could beat Stasis. The Prison. The Prison was basically the only way the deck won was through Mishra's Factory beatdowns or just decking the shit out of you. That was the only way you won back then. And it was relatively good at beating Stasis. It was basically a deck with about, I don't know, at most 25 land, at most. Probably around 23 land. And every other card was an answer to anything else that could be out there. Wrath of God for creatures, Armageddon for lands, Sword to Plowshares for creatures, Artifact would be Divine Offering, Disenchant, and, some mana excel like Fell War Stones. And, of course, Icy Manipulators were there. Basically, Icy Manipulator would be, you'd set it up normally around like turn 3 if you had the Fell War Stone. Normally around the time, normally about a turn or two before a Stasis player would actually get set up to play Stasis, and then just Armageddon the fucking board. And just, oh, fuck you. And then all you would do is I'd wait for you to put a land in play. When I switched to playing the Prison, I'd wait for you to put a land in play, which would power out my Fell War Stones, and then just, upkeep, tap the stone for whatever color mana that can produce, and tap my Icy and tap your land. Then you start dropping the bigger bombs. You start playing your lands. You start playing other, just whatever random stuff at the time. And then it was Winter Orb. Players only untap 1 land. Even if a Stasis player got the Stasis lock, they couldn't reset. Because you would normally either Despotic Scepter or Boomerang Stasis back to your hand to reset and just untap all your shit. Oh, I'll untap all my lands and play this. Drop Sarah Angel for beats, Iconic beats. Sarah Angel. So Winter Orb always kept it locked down. You would run basically 8 counter spells with Stasis and 4 Boomerangs. Couple Despotic Scepters, but Despotic Scepter only destroyed permanents you had. So you couldn't sit there and say, okay, kill your stuff. You couldn't do that. It wasn't that broken yet. We didn't have that much broken stuff. So you had to counter those Winter Orbs. You had to counter my Disenchants. You had to counter my Divine Offerings when I switched to playing Prison. Those are 12 spells, so there's a lot of stuff that you had to counter, and you only had 8 at best. And then you had to counter my Felden's Cane. It was a massive just... It was the hate deck of hate decks back in the day, basically, for me. It was just a giant deck of hate. Just hate everything. Hate your lands with Armageddon. Hate your creatures with Wrath of God. And your artifacts and shitty fucking enchantments with Disenchant or Divine Offerings or And I hate your lands even more because I'm going to play Winter Orb and Icy Manipulator. And this was... I mean, this was around the time that the Black Summer was starting to come to an end. When, like, the prison deck started showing up. And then you had, like, random insanity, like Browse Soul to be Digger combo deck. Well, not combo decks, but, like, Browse Soul to be Digger builds that were popping up here with... You know, Jester's Cap? Or was it Jester's Mask? No, it was Jester's Cap. It was Jester's Cap that was popping up, I think. And, like, a lot of players are, like, coming out nowadays, oh, this card is broken, this card is broken. If you played during the Black Summer, you have to remember, Wizards of the Coast really didn't playtest their cards before they let them out. They didn't sit there and say, oh, hey, should we release this card? Is it too broken? Like, you know, hey, well, should we release this? Or should we, like, up the mana cost? Or have a bigger drawback? They didn't do that back then. It was just, we're going to release this shit. And they did. So... I mean, you think Wizards dropped the ball when they released the Affinity mechanic. They at least tested that shit. They tested it. Now, granted, they probably tested it in a vacuum. More like a vacuum like block. Not like vacuum in standard or extended. But, I mean, back then when I really got into, like, tournament quality stuff, they didn't test shit. It was just, we're going to come out. So, I mean, obviously you had some really ridiculously broken cards that would come out. Like, you look at a card like Force of Will, and you think, like, how the hell could that card make it past R&D? I mean, a free counter spell? Pay 1 life, counter something amazing, tapped out for blue, which has an insane amount of counter magic already. Yeah. They just would release that stuff. That was how it was back then. I mean, that was the day. Those were the days, you know. Sarah Angel was the best creature to cast. You know, if you're playing against a white weenie deck, they tap out 12 lands, sack everything, Discern Orb, cast Balance for 2. They got 10 mana floating, which is the exact casting cost for 2 Sarah Angels. You knew something bad was coming down. You knew something brutal was going to hit the table. You knew it, man. It was just like, oh, shit, man. And then all your lands are gone, all your creatures are gone. And your opponent's got 2 4/4 beat sticks, you know. You know, if we ever did have sideboards, you know, Necro v Necro, turn 1, guy would drop Swamp, Dark Rit, Hippie, go. You'd pull. It's game 2 or 3 because you did your sideboard strategy. When we first started learning how to sideboard strategy, you'd go turn 1, Swamp, tap, Paralyze, and can't fucking Hypnotic Spectre. Fucking Paralyze. Paralyze was a tournament quality sideboard strategy for those turn 1 Hypnotic Spectres. It was a legit strategy for turn 1 Hypnotic fucking Spectres, man. It really was. You know, you'd sit there and you'd buy a pack of Ice Age and you'd be like, oh man, I gotta get that Underground River, man. I gotta get and you'd end up getting, what was it? Fucking Lava Tubes? Or it was like a depletion counter land, I think. You'd end up getting like Lava Tubes or something. Something ridiculous like that or something. Or maybe that was Alliances. Or maybe, I don't know. You know, you'd have like 18 copies of like Findhorn Elves in a fucking trade binder. For that one guy who just liked to play elves, or even though they sucked, he just wanted to play elves. it was an unbalanced environment, but it was fun because it was ridiculously psychotic. It was ridiculously broken. It wasn't... I mean, Urza Block was massively unbalanced, don't get me wrong. That's when I actually got out, because it was just, like, ridiculously unbalanced. It was more like who won the coin flip won the game. And it was just so freaking hilarious. Like, you go back and you look at, like, some of the old school deck techs. If you played back then, it was just one of those things. I'm thinking about doing the old school deck tech of the Stasis deck that I ran back in the day. I gotta get... I don't have Adhikar Waste anymore. I got rid of them because I don't play any format that I would really need Adhikar Waste in. If I'm gonna play blue-white, I got... You know, I'm gonna get Tundras. I'm gonna get Tundras. But I remember, man, when Homelands dropped, even though I was starting to play Stasis and getting really good at Magic and determining what cards are good, what cards are bad, what's worth the money, or what's worth this trade. Homelands came out. I remember walking through Millennium Games, or not Millennium Games, it's Millennium Games now, Crazy Igor's back then. And walking past the counter where they had like all the revised duels in like damn near mint condition, and seeing all the revised duels anywhere between $10 to $15. I think Plateau was $10, and then Underground Sea, blue black duel was $15, $16 maybe. And I was like, I got $25, man. I was like, fuck that shit. I'm gonna get me some Homelands. I need that Autumn Willow for my Erhnam-Geddon deck. You know, instead of just going and saying, hey man, do you have an Autumn Willow that I could buy? It was just, I'm just going to buy like, whatever the fucking price was, like X amount of random fucking, you know, packs from Homelands. Because, you know, it was like the greatest set ever. Flavor-wise, if you played Homelands alone, just Homelands as a set, it was beautiful. It was a beautiful set. Storyline, flavor-wise, it was a great set. When you had to combine it with everything else, it was like, what the fuck is this shit, man? It was ridiculous. But even then, we didn't know good cards when we saw them half the time. Memory Lapse, probably never going to be reprinted in standard format. First came out, Homelands. That's how powerful it was. We didn't notice it at first. It was like, why do I want to give my opponent the card back? We didn't understand tempo loss. We didn't understand it that much back then. But tune in for my next story of Magic the Gathering if you like that stuff. For my next story, I will talk about a more tempo-based build that I played during like mid to late '96, early '97, when it was Ice Age block, Mirage block. I think 4th edition was still legal. It might have been 5th edition. But I'd have to go back and just verify if it was 4th or 5th. I know I had Urg Raiders in the deck. I know it was like Urg Raiders, and well, it was 2 different decks, but they were both weenie strategies. I know I had like Black Knights, White Knights, like Urg Raiders. So I'd have to go back and check if it was either 5th or 4th edition, because I know Urg Raiders, I think they only got printed after it was Arabian Nights, Chronicles, and I think 4th edition, but I'd have to check. So anyways, this was like the Black Summer, my experiences with it in Magic the Gathering, the decks that I ran at the time, and how fun it was, and how insanely just ridiculously crazy it was as well. So, like, comment, if you like Magic, share this video, comment on it, subscribe for more deck techs of mine, stories, And, you know, pay 1 blue or bury Stasis during your upkeep. Everybody skips their untap phase.